Well, welcome to this very special collaboration involving me, Latike Bourke, and Julien Rose. No, did I say it right, Julien?
Yeah.
Parfait. We have invited a very special guest, Tristan, du Bourbon, Parme. Tristan, was this okay?
Yes, it is, Latike.
And we are going to spend the next 30 minutes or so breaking down what the hell is going on in French politics, because I'm very, I guess, captivated by what Macron has done, but I understand so little of it. So I brought together two people who know everything inside out. Julien, do you want to start first by explaining? Actually, I'll introduce myself to your Substack followers, but I'm an Australian journalist. I live in the UK. I've been here for 8 years, and I write for an Australian publication as well as on my own Substack and sometimes freelancing for the UK. Julien, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. So my name is Julien Oez. I am the editor of the French Dispatch, a formerly very small project that blew way out of control, and also a member of Emmanuel Macron's party Renaissance over in France, well, mostly focused being here in Brussels, translating EU policy for organizations and freelancing when I have time.
And Tristan, I have known you for many years as a fellow foreign correspondent in London. Who are you writing for?
So I'm writing for La Croix in France. It's a French national daily. La Libre Belgique in Belgium, also Belgium Daily, and La Tribune de Genève in Switzerland.
Okay.
And for other
Okay. My followers can see I've assembled two of the very best. Tristan, I'm going to start with you. Firstly, why are we even having an election in France right now?
Because Emmanuel Macron decided so. So in the evening of just after the result of the French part of the European election, that led to the Front National, the Rassemblement National, the new name of the party was called the Front National. It was created by Jean-Marie Le Pen, so the extreme right. So this party, which is now led by his daughter, Marine Le Pen, arrived first in the polls. Dramatic numbers. It was around 35%, which was around the double of every other party, except Macron's party was the first one behind. And besides that, all the parties were completely trashed, in fact. And so it was such a systemic change in French politics, because it happens during European election that extremes, as we've seen in the UK and in the other parties, the extremes goes up because they are angry against the governments, and being angry against Europe is a good way. Well, when you don't know who do you have to be angry to, you turn to Europe and say you can blame Europe for everything, as we've seen in the UK and as we've seen Latike here many years. And so Le Pen party being first and so high in the polls, Emmanuel Macron decided to dissolve the parliament and to launch new parliamentary elections. In France, it has to happen very quickly once you have announced the decision, and that's why it happened like 30 days after. Not even the first round of the election, it's in 2 rounds. The first round in the French election is, all the parties can take part in the election, and then you have to reach a certain level. I think, as Julien will confirm, I think it's 12.5%. to be in the second round of the election. So there is the election. Okay,
so the far right does very well in European elections. Macron takes this domestically as a point against him, and he dissolves the parliament. So is the president up for re-election, or it's just the parliament?
Just the parliament. The president is there until he was re-elected in 22. He will be there until 27. Whatever happens in the next few weeks, except of course if he decides to quit, but it will never happen for sure. So now it's only parliamentary elections.
Okay, Julien, what is the thinking behind calling the election now? What's propelled Macron to take an EU election result and make it about France?
So honestly, there's several things that we can derive from the situation. To be honest, it's quite a complex answer to it's a quite complex question to answer purely because the fact that there have been so many declarations about why Macron has done it, as well as so many vague ideas about why. So, for example, if we take Macron at his word, he basically saw it as a realignment of the French political sphere, and he wanted to reconfirm that vote in an election. Now, as Tristan will be able to tell you, nobody can see into the mind of a president. It's why we have so many biographies after they leave office and after they die, because quite honestly, there are so many views about what they do. However, there's several other ideas that we have. So, for example, we've heard that maybe Darmanin, his interior minister, suggests that it was a good way to sort of recover more quickly. You've heard some people say that it was an emotional reaction to the fact that the election for our party was an unmitigated disaster, quite honestly.
The French
You've
emotional? I never.
Yeah, I know, right? And there's a lot of there's so many things about it, but what we can do is we can look at the reality. So basically, we had very bad results. Macron decided to throw everybody back into the polls, probably hoping that it was, in this case, as many theorists have said for years, a case of the far right doing very well at European level, alongside, the pro-Europeans having a moderately similar voting level if you count Place Publique, the PS, Ensemble, and then also Les Républicains on the moderate side. But the reality is that he's basically done something that has, quite honestly, and excuse my French, but pissed off the majority of the French electorate, because now you've either got people who are very happy that the RN are going to come in first place with a big majority, which we can get onto, well, not a huge majority, but a relative majority. We've got a situation where people within the presidential majority are now fleeing the boat as they see some writing on the walls. We've seen Edouard Philippe basically put a knife into Macron's forehead over the last 4 days, constantly giving quotes against him. You've got a lot of militants who are trying to figure out where they're going to go to try to continue their political careers. And you've got the entirety of the left, which seems to be submitting itself to La France Insoumise and Jean-Luc Mélenchon. And a lot of people are really angry with Macron. And to be honest, no matter what his plan was behind this, no matter what the idea was, it looks like it's backfired completely in just about every way. And I mean, I'm not the only person from Renaissance who's saying that this was a stupid move, quite frankly. And you've got deputies up and down the country and the world saying that it was a dumb move, to be honest. So, I mean, I think it's almost less a question of what was the strategy behind it, but why did he do something so foolish? And who convinced him that it was a good idea in the Elysee, quite honestly.
In the parliament, how does the system work? Did Macron have a majority, and was the lack of having majority partly behind this decision? Because I've been reading analysis that he was very worried about trying to get his budget through next year. Has he been trying to preempt this scenario?
In fact, there wouldn't be any parliamentary election until 2027.
Mm-hmm.
So in fact, there was no danger for him to do this. If any of his majority is not big, he has a majority, enough majority to be able to go through most of the things with alliances. So I'm not sure it was. I think two things. Why? Well, Julien, you want to answer why? I will suggest a few things. According to what we've seen in the past with Macron. Remember, if you don't know, in 2017, he was elected in the second round of the presidential election because he was the man who said, I'll be the one against Marine Le Pen, against the extreme right. Mm-hmm. Again, 5 years later, all the other parties completely imploded, and he was the one against Marine Le Pen. And I think that he looked at the electoral position of the different parties and he said, you know what? I can do it again. I've done it a few years ago. I can be the one again to save France because he really believes he can save France and Europe behind him. And because if you looked 2 weeks ago, or was a political party 3 weeks ago, you had the right-wing party, so Marine Le Pen, mm-hmm. The center-right, I would say, even if they are not center-right anymore, they turn so much right-wing, like the Tories in the UK. Mm-hmm. They turn they are following le Rassemblement National in a way like the Tories here in the UK are following Farage and Reform. Yeah. and you had Macron's party, and you had multiple parties on the left. So he was thinking, the left will never get together. There are so much opposition between them, even on policies, but also humanly. They can't stand each other. And mostly they can't stand Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who is the leader of La France Insoumise, which is the most extreme left party. Well, not the most extreme, but let's say it's the most vocal party in France on the extreme left. And you have the right, in was, I know the right, I'm sure they will fractured when I launch its election, because some will go with Rassemblement National and some will stay and try to stay in center. And this is what happened on the right. So Eric Ciotti, with the leader, the president of the party, who was at least, said, I'm going with Front National. I do agree they have such a big push from the electorate. People want them in power. We have to support them and we have to go with them to ally, which is a Gaullist party from De Gaulle, to the extreme right. And part of this party said, never. It's against the Gaulle policies. It's about France. We cannot go with the extreme right. But what, in fact, completely messed up Macron's plan is that the left got together like this. It was seriously unbelievable. I didn't expect it at all because there's been so much infighting for the last few years.
Doesn't the left coalescing as a bloc,
Yes,
right? Or doesn't that stop Le Pen's party, or no?
not enough. If you look at the polls at the moment, the far right is still on pole position, not by far, but they're still in pole position. Yeah. And so they'll probably be the first party in parliament. The left is going up, strike strongly because, I come back afterwards, about this. So the left is a second party, second bloc at the moment in the polls, quite close to Front National. But the main thing here is Macron's party is disappearing. Like in the polls, Renaissance is like nothing. So because in fact, he was hoping to be the bloc against Front National, against the extreme right. And in fact, the left-wing parties are happening to be the one against the extreme right.
Let's delve into that. Why? We know, I mean, people who don't observe French politics but have seen news from France over the last couple of years, we know there's been a lot of riots and very, I guess, violent protests against Macron. He's driven through reforms. A lot of those reforms didn't seem so unreasonable to me, I've got to say. Why is Macron so unpopular?
And for people who are following British politics, you have to remember that Macron at the moment is less popular than Rishi Sunak. So, Rishi Sunak, when you know about this, when you could look at the polls, is even less popular. So you know what? For me, doing this kind of bet, well, I can't make it happen again. When you are so low in the polls, it's, for me, either he was very badly advised, well, he was probably very badly advised, or it's an ego trip so nuts and so out of touch and not after for reality that I don't understand. I understand why Renaissance activists are mad about this, and even his own government is mad about this because it cannot work. Well, it could have worked if the left didn't get together, but now they don't get together. And how they could get together, the left, because Jean-Luc Mélenchon, which is very divisive personality, in fact, shut down in a way. In the first days of the negotiation, he completely disappeared. It was other members of his party who got together with the other party and said, we have to get together. Mélenchon, that nobody likes in other parties, like completely disappeared. And he made a few interviews and then said, you know what? Of course, if they want me to be prime minister, if we win, I'll be. But you know what? I know it won't happen. Nobody likes me in this block. So you know what? I want the block to win. This is the most important at the moment.
Okay, we'll come back to future prime ministers. But Julien, maybe you could also answer that. Why is Macron so unpopular?
Well, I mean, there's two various phenomena around this. So first of all, as you see quite often in Anglophone media, Emmanuel Macron has a way of speaking that's considered disrespectful to the French population. And he has said several things that you can sort of understand what he was trying to do and what he was trying to say, but it just comes across in such a violent way that it wasn't necessarily conducive to what he was doing. So, for example, I mean, Tristan probably remembers this quite clearly. There was a young man who came to speak to him about his CV and how he couldn't find a job, and Macron's response was, "Look, give me your CV. We'll cross the road, and I will find you a job in less than 10 minutes," or something along those lines. And it's like,
Wow.
firstly, okay, yeah, if the president tells someone to hire someone, they're probably going to hire the kid. But on top of that, that's not quite how it works, you know? And there's a lot of statements like this that have made him quite unpopular and made him seem quite detached, despite the fact that by all accounts, you could probably imagine that Emmanuel Macron is quite a nice guy and that he probably gets along with people generally, you know? But there's been enough situations like this and a lot of these discourses that have worked against him, on top of the fact that, as Sandrine Rousseau was recently harpooned for on C'est à vous, I think, or something like this, that a lot of people on the left have spent about 7 years now basically telling everybody that Emmanuel Macron is just as bad as Marine Le Pen and that he's going to steal all of the money and send them to camps or something, you know. And you're seeing this getting pulled up more and more now, where you've seen a lot of politicians feel quite uncomfortable about the role they've played in actually almost what we call the banalization of the far right, where they basically compared people like, I don't know, find the craziest person on the far right like Zemmour and basically spend time telling everybody Emmanuel Macron is no better than these people. These people are all the same. They just want to rob you. This is why you should vote for the far left, you know? And it's something that's gotten quite, it's something that if you didn't know about topics like securitization, politics, how language actually impacts the way people think, you'd be forgiven to say, okay, you know, this is a bit of a reach. People don't really care that much. But if you genuinely spend every week telling people that Macron is basically a quasi-fascist, that he's an authoritarian, which isn't necessarily the case all the time, even if some of the tendencies of the French Fifth Republic can give that impression, notably the 49.3, all thanks to Charles de Gaulle. There's a lot of things here that they combine to form an image of a president who basically borderline hates everybody. And I've heard this from my personal family. Like, people ask me why on earth I'm campaigning for a man like Macron who, and I quote, would send me to a work camp if he could. You know, there's a perception of the president that I don't think personally represents what's actually happening, for example. And to come back to something that was being said earlier, one big part of what makes him unpopular actually is the whole procedure and the situation with the Assemblée Nationale for the last mandate. So, for example, the last Assemblée Nationale was Renaissance had a relative majority, but they couldn't pass everything on their own. So basically what was happening was that for things like the budget, and this is why, again, this makes zero sense because he's been doing this for the last 2 or 3 years now already. For everything budgetary and financial, he had to use a procedure called Article 49.3, which basically gives the government the right to just shotgun anything through the Assemblée Nationale. And the only way of stopping it is by a vote of confidence in the government, which, if it's successful, brings down the entire government and forces another situation. Now, the two people who were always pushing for this, and you saw this usually on France 24 if you were looking at the French segments, La France Insoumise and the Rassemblement National were the ones who were causing the most carnage we have ever seen, I think, since the Third Republic, when literally nobody could get anything done whatsoever, and people were throwing shoes at each other across the seats. I mean, the situation was so absurd that you'd have, for example, Elizabeth Borne, when she announced the first 49.3, basically had to scream at the top of her lungs just to be heard because the far left and the far right were literally yelling over her with, correct me if I'm wrong, Tristan, they had like megaphones in their hands trying to drown out the prime minister so she couldn't actually announce what she was doing. And in some way, this is why Macron is kind of pushing for this election, because he's hoping that we get past that and it becomes easier for him. Only that, again, this is an assumption on our part. Nobody quite knows why he did this, and I think it's actually made things worse because he's going to go from 244 seats to what IFOP are saying may be as low as 80 seats.
Mm-hmm.
So it does make sense.
So his style has made him very unpopular. Have his reforms, or is it more about his personality that you don't like?
I would say it's both. I would say it's both. As Julien said, a bit diplomatically, he's perceived as very condescending and arrogant. Like, you can throw him in the street, if you throw him in the crowd, he will insult people. It will be because I think it is what it appears. Okay, I'm not saying it's like this, but what it appears is it doesn't have any connection with people like I would say common people. It's very friendly among his groups, but when you find people who are asking questions, he's like he appears to be very arrogant. I'm not saying he is. It appears, and in politics, what is important is what it appears. Who cares if he's
100%.
friendly or not?
Yeah.
He appears as very arrogant and condescending. So for people he is. And a story about his policies. So he's trying to path a reform of retirement age that is very unpopular. He said, in fact, many years ago, he would never do it. As soon as he was reelected, he said, "You know what? We're going for it." So you know what? It's a bit too much for this. Of course, he's explaining, "I have to do it because so." But you know what? It's too much for this politician who is despised by many of the electorates, I think.
It's interesting because I was having a conversation with somebody, I guess you could say they were an elite. I won't reveal their identity. When I asked them who their favorite or most impressive European leader was, they said Macron because of the reforms he's trying to push through. So there's obviously an economic elite, I'll put it that way. So I think there's a disparity perhaps between clearly how the French people are seeing what he's trying to do and the scope of the ambition there and how other people might see or even appraise his economic ambitions. Okay, so we have established he's unpopular, he's got unpopular policies. What is so appealing about the far right then? Why are they surging in the polls?
I mean, it's almost, I was seeing this more and more in the media right now. There's lots of interviews where they're asking people what they'll do when the far right comes, what they like about them, how they'll react, and all this kind of stuff. I mean, for example, you had Vincent Cassel, who is far from being the Français lambda in general, saying that, you know, maybe why not try it, because maybe we need to do this to know who we actually are as people, as a population, you know, which I think is a bit naive, but to be honest, I kind of understand the sentiment. And we've also seen videos of people being, you know, some vox pops where they ask people, what do you like about the RN? Why are you voting for them? And you'll have people who will straight up say, oh, I just want to vote for the RN, I've not read their policies. You know, which again, you can't say if that's the general population, but I mean, I think once you have such a polemic situation when people really didn't like Sarkozy, people really didn't like Hollande. So that's already the two main parties historically that are broadly disliked, and they've sort of made a fool of themselves over the last 7 years. Then on top of that, you have someone who comes and says they have the answers to a lot of France's problems and then becomes incredibly unpopular themselves, which kind of gets rid of the center. And honestly, I think a part of it is that people are saying, you know, maybe we do try the far right, which I think, again, I personally don't like that because, you know, I cut my teeth on British politics and French politics to some extent as well. But, you know, I saw what Brexit played out and how that worked out. But honestly, it's becoming a case of not only this, but I think also, and this is something that's quite important. I think we sometimes brush it under the carpet because it's not necessarily the most sexy thing to talk about, and it's quite hard to prove. I think that the level of disinformation and misinformation across social media is, I think, heads and tails above what it was even around Brexit, you know, because, for example, I've had situations where friends have sent me articles about how Macron was going to put barcodes on Muslim children, you know, and they sent me a link and they're like, see, it's on the internet, it's true. And I click on the website and someone has basically fabricated something that looks like, I can't remember what it was, but let's say it's like one, you know. And if you hover over the links of the website, it just gives you like JavaScript errors because they've only coded this one web page on a website that's meant to look like a proper website. But the reality is that it's just they've created one web page, you can't go anywhere or anything, but because it looks official and it has a real journalist name, people are like, okay, you know what, this is exactly what's happening. And I think that this is part of a bigger issue that we have in Western society overall, when you look at Trump, Boris Johnson, all this kind of stuff, where we don't teach people how to absorb information correctly and sort of read out the bullshit from the truth. And while it's not a panacea, it's something that I think has actually made us more susceptible to a lot of disinformation and misinformation overall. Now, we all know Twitter as well. Twitter is a cesspool of garbage, and you have so much nonsense there that people genuinely think that what they see on Twitter is real. And that is a big problem as well.
It's a good point to raise, because we had an incident here in the UK during this election campaign where a guy I really like and really well known pollster got tricked by a deep fake AI of Keir Starmer and Nigel Farage playing Minecraft. Now, of course, it was fake. He went on BBC and said, you know, these are these videos out there on the internet, but they're fake. So we are definitely going to have to deal with this in one way or the other before it bites us. But back to the
Yeah, if I might come back also about the policies that
Yes.
make the Front National le Rassemblement National. Sorry, I can't go with the new name.
It's the same thing, to be honest. Let's say it.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, Rassemblement means
ask about that. What? So they rebranded themselves? Is this part
yes,
kind of
exactly.
nice and normal now?
Exactly. What is interesting is the Front National means it's a national bloc. It means
Yeah.
more or less, and it was created by the father. And to get rid of the image of the father that was really nasty, who was an Holocaust denier, and they created Rassemblement National. Rassemblement means get together. So it's a national get together. So now it's much more inclusive than to have a bloc. It's very, very clever. So that's why they rebelled themselves, got rid of the father, who is never talking anymore. And you know, it's a very clever move. To come back on the policies themselves, the Front National, of course, it's a protest party. There is absolutely no doubt about this. And the fact that they have never been in power is very appealing to a lot of people who are fed up of the two parties, as Julien explained and detailed. Second thing, for the last, I would say 15 years, the French political party in power have been promoting some of the policies of the extreme right, mostly on immigration. And during the last, since Darmanin is the Home Office minister, secretary, he has been very tough on migrants, on asylum seeker, on refugees, and it has been banalizing in a way those ideas of the extreme right. But as we know in the UK, when the center or center-right parties is promoting those ideas, people at one is like, why are we going for him? Why if we didn't go with the parties that really had those ideas in the first place? So why shouldn't we go to reform in the UK and stay with the Tories when their ideas are coming from reform? And here it's like, why should we stay with Renaissance, who is very tough, playing tough, but we are not sure if they are really tough or if they are playing tough? And why are we not going to this party? And for everyone now, of course, the fact that there is an economic crisis, a cost of living crisis is a big part of this, because people are trying to find a reason for this crisis. So, of course, the party in government is being blamed for it. But at the same time, yeah, they don't know the policies, but they know also that extreme right is trying to pretend that it's the party of the workers. So it's very interesting, because the workers now, so the working class, is majority not voting, and the first parties they're voting for is the Front National, because they can't find themselves in Macron. Absolutely not. They have no connection to him. And the left-wing parties completely abandoned the working class. If you take La France Insoumise, for example, was some of the party are very working class, I would say kind of modern communist in a way in their ideas economically, but socially they are considered as very woke. And for most of the working class, they cannot vote for people who have woke ideas as a priority over economic issues.
Okay,
And
it sounds very similar to what's happening in the United States, basically.
Exactly. There is
votes to Trump. This sounds very similar.
Exactly. And it's like when you hear about Me Too and Black Lives Matter, people are like, okay, you know what? I don't really disagree with this, but it's not the main point in my life. My life, it's about economics. It's about public services crashing down. And we have had lots of government, in fact, for the last 15 years, was trying to be like, was trying to I wouldn't say it's always willing, but public services have been crumbling. So they're still in good state comparing to other countries. I would say, you don't talk about Scandinavia because it's very good there, but if you compare to the UK, it's much better, of course, in France than in the UK, or of course in the US, because in the US there is no real public services. I'm exaggerating slightly, but it's still a good level, but compared to what it was, it's perceived as awful. And the trajectory of Macron is made it even worse. So it's perception. It's also part of the reality. It's also perception. But it's compared to compared to where you're coming from. If you're coming from there going down, it's always better than anywhere else, but still.
Got you. So Macron came onto the scene as the leader of a new party. If his party collapses, as you've been saying might happen, does that show that this centrist movement was a one-hit wonder? Or is it the case that Macron himself is responsible? Because there's not really any talk of succession planning, who would come next after Macron. It seems to be a very one-man show. Is this part of the problem?
So on the topic of the successor, so this has been a big issue for the presidential majority for pretty much since the beginning, because everybody always saw that there was a timer on Macron. So, because in France, you can only have 2 successive mandates, and sure, you can have a third if you wait 5 years and then run again, but you only have the 2 successive mandates. But this has pretty much been an issue that he's been trying to solve for years, because you had Bayrou, who was hoping to have his last shot at being president. Then you had Darmanin, Bruno Le Maire, and then Edouard Philippe, who have kind of been the presumptive heirs for the last few years now. On top of that, you had various attempts to sort of cultivate certain people like Julien de Normandie. Gabriel Attal is the most recent attempt. But ultimately, the issue is that they have all suffered from the fact that Emmanuel Macron is quite top-heavy in the way he works, first of all. So he kind of has a way of effacing people and getting rid of people. And it got to such an extent that during the European election situation, when he was trying to find a lead candidate, I think there was about 12 people who said no.
Wow.
And this is why it led to the really disappointing situation for Valérie Ayer, who's an MEP that I have a lot of respect for and I've worked with previously, who basically is the only one who basically had the balls to actually step up to the plate. And then ended up dealing with the top-down shenanigans where you had Gabriel Attal, who was busting out of every single wall he possibly could, like the Kool-Aid man, And I mean, it was horrifying as a member of the party and as someone who really has a lot of respect and really likes Valérie Ayer, because I don't think anybody could disagree, even Bardella, that she does a good job in the European Parliament. She's always there, present, speaks to everybody, and works very well. But because the polling numbers weren't where they wanted them to be, they ended up basically sidelining her, and we saw the most uncomfortable thing where they basically crashed into her auditorium interview, to the point that François-Xavier Bellamy, basically, I always forget his name, basically said, how do you feel comfortable doing that to your own candidate? That's actually kind of sexist. Like, what the hell, guys? Seriously. But I mean, coming back to the actual question, right now it's looking like there's a split happening in Renaissance, where Edouard Philippe has basically said, you know what? I've had enough. I'm not dealing with this shit anymore. Macron fucked up. This is a shambolic situation. This is embarrassing. We need to get past this. And there was always this kind of tension between Macron and Edouard Philippe, even when he was prime minister, with especially the COVID handling falling on his head, which is why he developed this medical condition that forced him to lose all of his hair on his head. But right now, what we're going to see is we're going to see people starting to step up and try to figure out if they can run for 2027. So, for example, Gabriel Attal is probably not going to make it. Valérie Ayer is not going to make it. Darmanin has said that he's not going to allow himself to be a minister for one day longer after the elections, which means that he's probably either going to try to make a run for it, or he may have realized that he's pushed it too far and he can't actually go further. And Bruno Le Maire has also said similar, where he's not going to be a minister anymore, and he decided not to run in this election, despite all ministers being asked to run. Mm-hmm. So we've now gotten to a situation where currently, in the polling as well as in general, it's looking like Edouard Philippe is the successor, and Edouard Philippe is the one who has the best chances on his head. The problem is, does he have enough friends in the majority to do it? And has he avoided pissing off enough people that he's actually going to be able to do it in the first place? Because God knows Darmanin and Bruno Le Maire and Attal probably have enough dirt on him that they could probably try to sink his ship fairly quickly. And I mean, to be honest, even as an expert in French politics and as someone who works in French politics, like Tristan, we're not going to know anything for about another 2 years, are we? To be honest, like people are going to announce in like January 2026. By that point, we may have become, I don't know, we may be under the lead of Consul Marine Le Pen or something, for all we know. So we'll have to wait and see. Or who knows? We may have an election next year again. We're having a lot of them at the moment, so we'll have to see what happens, basically.
What do you think, Tristan? Do you think if the party collapses, it's Macron's own fault?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the one to blame is Macron. Well, in French politics, you always have been a strong center, and even if there was not a strong center party, so usually the party was elected was the centrist party. Except in 81, I would say, when Mitterrand was first elected, it was the first time that the left-wing party was elected. But still, if you look at its policies, after like a year, they changed completely and they went liberal on economic terms, which means center-right. And yeah, they were like, okay, we can't do this. And he was re-elected as a centrist left party. Chirac, same. He was elected as a center-right party, except Sarkozy maybe was a bit more right-wing and a bit more extreme. But you know what? He was so extreme as a president that he was beaten by Hollande, who said, you know what? I want to be a center-left president. And Macron was elected like this. People were like, we're fed up with the main parties. He said, I would be the one. Remember that he was elected also as an anti-elite, an anti-main political system, an anti-political system party. He was like, I'm not part of them. Well,
I mean, we were liberal populists in 2017.
Yeah.
It was very populist presentation, and this is why he won. Remember, he won very marginally in the first round, so it was very tight for him. But still, it was his campaign, and it worked. But now, like, it could happen again because people are a bit fed up, and we might talk about the polls now because.
So let's look at that scenario. Who becomes the prime minister? Does the president appoint the prime minister, or do they have to automatically come from the party with the largest majority? And if it's RN, is that then Jordan Bardella who becomes the prime minister in this scenario, do you think?
The way it works is that the Assemblée Nationale, so it's the largest party or the largest coalition that nominates a prime minister.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if we have the Front Populaire who come in first place and they have a majority, they will put forward someone like Jean-Luc Mélenchon or Glucksmann or whoever they choose as the prime minister. Same thing for the RN. If they have a majority, then they will do that. It gets tricky, however, if nobody has a majority, which I'm looking at the IFOP poll from 21st of June, and currently it looks like nobody actually has a majority, and I don't see the Front Populaire linking up with Ensemble, linking up with Les Républicains just to keep the RN out. Because what they will do is you will see Jean-Luc Mélenchon will say it's either me or nobody. And similar on the far right, I mean, the RN has no way of actually forming an outright majority, even a relative majority, if I'm not wrong, without Les Républicains, who have already said, and they had their mini civil war where people locked themselves into a room and Eric Ciotti threw his toys out of the pram for 2 days, where you have a system where people, they're not going to work with the far right. So what's actually possible is that we don't actually have a prime minister. And I have to admit, even in all of the theoretical study and work I have done, I don't think I have ever come across a piece of work that has ever shown what happens when you don't have a prime minister. I mean, Tristan, you're probably a bit more experienced with this kind of stuff than I am. You just run a new election again, don't you?
I think so. If they can't agree, but yeah, if they can't agree, they might go for another election.
Even with the 1 year term.
But the thing is, yeah, I think it will be the case because in fact, as Julien said, you propose your prime minister, you propose your government, and then you have to be voted in by the parliament.
Yeah.
So if you don't get the vote, well, you can't create you're not prime minister anyway. You can't create a government. But
Headed for uncharted territory.
yeah,
Oh
absolutely.
yeah.
I think it never happened in France, something like this, because you only, what happened is many times in France, not many times, but a few times in France already, you had what you call cohabitation. Cohabitation means cohabitating. Well, so you have the president who is from one party, parliamentary election, the opposition is elected, so you have president from one party and prime minister from another party, but they got the majority. And I think it was one of the plan of Macron saying, when you have cohabitation, the prime minister is never elected president at the election afterwards. They always lose the election because they are like, power destroys them in a way. They lose credibility in what is in power. And
Far right come in now before the presidency is up.
exactly. I think his plan. It was, well, he was expecting to win. I might have said, even if I don't win, if they come in power, they will show in 3 years that they are worth to nothing, and they will lose the presidential election in 27. It's very risky because they could also do not much and say, well, we didn't have a big majority, we couldn't do much. And look, in fact, one of the main issues we've seen here with Brexit, something that is exactly happening the same. Before Brexit, all the Remainers said, look, Brexit will be awful, the country will collapse. And Brexiteers now are still saying, well, the country didn't collapse. The economy probably has been affected, but not so much. It will be the same with the extreme right. They will say, well, look, you've said that France will collapse with the extreme right in power. They will be awful. If they are not awful, people will say, well, they are not so bad, in fact. So you promised us the worst. It didn't came. So in fact, maybe we'll vote for them again in 27.
Interesting. I mean, Giorgia Meloni is a good example here, right? Because everyone said, oh, there's this fascist coming into power. Italy is going to do all these terrible, crazy things. Actually, she's moderated a lot in government. So is there a scenario where French voters think, well, Italy didn't collapse. Maybe we can give this a shot in France and these guys might govern a bit more normally once they're in power?
Yeah, just
no,
one thing, Meloni. She mellowed towards the EU. Like she was saying, I want to get out of the EU, of the euro. And now she said, you know what? Not sure it's a great idea. So she got friend with everybody in the EU. Ursula von der Leyen say, oh, you're my new friend, blah, blah, blah. But if you look, that was a very clever move because if you look at the policies, internal policies, that's very different. Anti-divorce policies and talks about this, anti-gays, anti-immigration, anti-foreigners. But my issue with the EU people is that they don't look at this.
Yeah.
And in fact, the problem is she got respectability from Ursula von der Leyen and going around with those people and getting along with those people. And people in Italy saying, oh, if they like her in the EU, maybe what she's doing here is not so bad. And for me, I think it's what the EU politicians have done is really quite irresponsible in a way, because it gave credibility to Meloni and to her internal policies. And and it could happen exactly the same with Bardella. Marine Le Pen said he would be our candidate for prime minister, and Bardella, I think, would be the same. He won't go against the EU. He won't go against the euro. He might switch a few states in France, but we don't know. As I said before, they're pretending to be the party of the working class.
So you don't think we'll see a move for Frexit, quit NATO, abandon Ukraine if they get in?
Ukraine, I'm not sure. It could happen because it's really a defining line for Rassemblement National at the moment. But Frexit, not. They won't do it now, at least. They want to be sure to gain the presidency in 27, when then, if they win it, because the presidential election might happen at the same time with parliamentary election again. And once they are in power and they have the majority to do everything, then they can do everything and nobody can stop them.
Okay.
Remember, if Cameron would have said, let's go for Brexit, it would have been a 75% majority. So if the party in power says, let's get out,
It will be out. Julian, I mean, actually, there is a comment on the record. I think George Osborne is on the record as saying Macron told him he would never offer a referendum like Brexit because the French people would vote out.
Nice.
Julian, let's talk about Jordan Bardella. Who
Yeah.
is this guy? He seems to be a superstar who's just catapulted onto the scene. He uses TikTok, I think, very well to reach younger voters. Why has he got this star power? Can you explain him?
So, firstly, we need to also look at the way France structures politically. So, for example, France is, as you say, it's a very technocratic society where to get to the highest points of society, you have to usually follow the énarque path, where it basically guides you through the political sphere and you get posted in some kind of ministry or something, or some agency. Or you usually come from a fairly well-to-do family. You get to go through the prépa and everything. You then go to Sciences Po Paris or Sorbonne. You then go on to a master's, and you get a nice job somewhere being a consultant or whatever. Or you become a journalist, or you become a politician who's not rich or whatever. Well, they're all rich in some sense, but you know. When you look at Bardella, however, he is literally just and I'm gonna say this in a way that may be considered slightly vulgar, but I should clarify that I don't mean it this way because I am also a kid from a poor background. He's a poor kid who grew up in a banlieue, who just was a fan of Marine Le Pen's policies, managed to stick himself in front of enough cameras that someone noticed him. And then he was slowly adopted as the protege of various politicians in the RN, had an image constructed around him by experts, and is now someone who is young, relatively respectable, doesn't come from a traditional political background or have a potential parcours politique, and who is also literally considered as the continuation of Marine Le Pen's legacy. So, like, people always say Marion Maréchal, blah blah blah, her sister, etc., etc. You can put them all to the side. When people think of Marine Le Pen, the next name they think of is always Jordan Bardella, because she has, for all intents and purposes, made him her successor. If she fails to be president or she becomes president, he follows her immediately after, or he's her prime minister. And the thing with that is that that counts for a lot. So, you know, for example, just like Sarkozy played on the fact that he was Chirac's successor, who played on the fact that he was a descendant politically of de Gaulle and all of this kind of thing. This matters a lot because it shows a level of respectability and it shows a sort of political genealogy that people can follow and say, you know what, I liked de Gaulle. That means that I'm going to like Chirac, which means I'm going to like Sarkozy, which means I'm probably not going to like Wauquiez, but that's a different story entirely. But there's a lot of these pathways that are important to French people.
It's like a dynastic feel to it almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's something that, combine this with the fact that Bardella is smart, he knows how to avoid the uncomfortable questions, as we saw in, they did an enquête on television about him, a documentary showing how he rose through the ranks. When it came to really uncomfortable questions, he appears to be bulletproof, and he either says what the people want to hear, or he just avoids it completely, diverts, and then just moves on. And like we saw several times, that you had people who helped him construct the image that said that we made him this way so that he would be elected as president one day.
So he's a great communicator.
He's been trained to be a great communicator. That doesn't mean that he is a great communicator. Because it's very easy to follow templates about how you do things and to follow templates when it comes to TikTok and these kind of things. And to be honest, I'm 99.9% certain that he doesn't do 90% of his social media stuff. I'm willing to...
That's not wild, is it? Most high-ranked politicians.
You'd be surprised, actually.
All done by minions somewhere, isn't it?
Not necessarily. I mean, for example, from the best of knowledge I know, I mean, the majority of what Macron pumps out is stuff that he writes himself. Because he doesn't like giving people his own equipment, his own thing.
I would suggest that might be one of his problems, but
you know, this is definitely an opinion that we can follow. Huh? But we should also know that he's a lot safer on social media than he is when it comes to his public pronouncements. To be fair.
Yes, indeed. Okay, all right. I think we've just about answered everything. So why don't we reconvene perhaps after the election and dissect everything that went down. And in the meantime, happy birthday, Tristan, for election day #1. And then
happy birthday.
Julian, wish us the best of luck for the UK election as well.
Oh
And
yeah, don't worry, I'm working on it too. So you have all my sympathy.
it's so crazy, right? Just
Yeah.
it's like Macron went, Rishi, hold my beer. And let's catch up after the French and the UK elections and go through everything, because I think we will know how the landscape for Europe and Ukraine is then affected.
Sure.
And we can have a bit more talk around that.
Let's do that.
Guys,
Perfect.
thank you so much for joining me. And Tristan, I owe you that glass of wine that I've long promised you. And Julian, next time I'm in Brussels, we'll go out.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys. Talk
Take care. Thank you, Julien.
Thank you both. Take care.
Bye.